Marcus, let's start at the very beginning. What was that final moment in your corner office when you knew you had to leave everything behind?
Tony, I was staring at my computer screen at 2 a.m., and I realized I hadn't seen actual sunlight in 3 days. My assistant had just quit via text message. My ulcer was acting up again, and I was eating my 4th gas station sandwich of the week. But the breaking point? I got a notification that I'd missed my nephew's birthday party while I was in back-to-back meetings about optimizing our optimization meetings. I looked around that glass prison and thought, this isn't living. This is just expensive dying. So I walked out that night and never looked back.
But here's what I'm curious about, Marcus. How does a man who couldn't handle human interaction discover peace through the very thing he was running from?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
So, Marcus, let's talk about that first week in the cabin. You just walked away from everything, the corner office, the 6-figure salary, the life most people spend decades building. What was going through your mind when you first turned that key?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I keep thinking I should have some profound answer about finding myself or embracing simplicity, but honestly, terror, pure bone-deep terror. I stood there with my hand on that door handle for maybe 10 minutes, just listening to the silence.
The silence. That's interesting. Most people talk about escaping to nature for the peace and quiet. You make it sound almost threatening.
It was threatening. When you've spent 23 years drowning in conference calls and email notifications and the constant hum of the city, silence isn't peaceful, it's deafening. I remember thinking I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the pine walls. Made me realize I'd been running from quiet my entire adult life.
And this cabin, describe it for us. What did you see when you finally opened that door?
Chuckles softly. Well, the listing had called it rustic charm, which I learned is real estate code for bring your own everything. One room may be 400 square feet, a wood-burning stove that looked like it predated the Civil War, a sink with a hand pump that squeaked like a dying mouse every time you used it, and windows. God, Tony, these huge windows that looked out onto nothing but trees for miles.
Nothing but trees. How did that hit you, coming from Manhattan?
Like stepping onto another planet. I'd gotten so used to measuring distance in city blocks, you know? Starbucks to subway entrance, subway to office building. Suddenly I'm looking at this endless carpet of green, and I can't see a single human structure anywhere. Not a cell tower, not a power line, not even a hiking trail. Just trees breathing in the wind.
Breathing in the wind. That's a beautiful way to put it.
Pause. I didn't think it was beautiful then. Honestly, it felt like the trees were watching me, judging me, like they could smell the failure on me, the corporate cologne and the stress sweat and the desperation.
Tell me about that desperation, Marcus. What exactly were you running from?
Inhales deeply. The morning I left, I'd been in the office for 36 straight hours. 36 hours, Tony. There was this merger deal that was falling apart, and somehow I'd become the guy holding all the pieces together with caffeine and sheer stubbornness. I remember looking at myself in the men's room mirror around hour 34, and I didn't recognize the person staring back.
What did you see instead?
A ghost. Hollow eyes, gray skin, hands shaking from too much coffee and too little sleep. But it wasn't just that one night. It was the accumulation of 15 years of nights just like it. I'd traded my life for a salary, Tony, and I finally realized the math didn't work.
So you just walked out?
I wish I could say I had some dramatic moment of clarity, but it was more pathetic than that. I was sitting at my desk, staring at this spreadsheet that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics, and I just started crying. Right there in my glass office where anyone could see. 52 years old, crying over a laptop like a child.
And that's when you knew you had to leave?
That's when I knew I was already gone. My body had been showing up to that office for months, but my soul had checked out somewhere around year 10. The cabin wasn't an escape plan. It was a recovery room.
How did you even know about this place? It sounds pretty remote.
My uncle had mentioned it years ago. He'd bought it as a hunting cabin back in the 70s, used it maybe twice a year. When he passed, it just sat empty. My cousin was going to sell it, but when I called him that morning, literally from my office parking garage. He offered to let me stay there instead. I think he could hear something in my voice.
What was that drive like? Leaving the city behind?
Surreal. I kept expecting to hit traffic, but the further north I got, the more the roads emptied out. By the time I turned onto the Forest Service road, I hadn't seen another car in 20 minutes. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt, and with every mile, I felt like I was driving backwards through time.
Backwards, through time. How so?
Well, you start seeing hand-painted signs instead of digital billboards, mailboxes made from old milk cans, houses with actual front porches where people wave at strangers. It's like stumbling into a world that never got the memo about the 21st century.
And you liked that feeling?
Laughs. I was terrified of it. I kept checking my phone for signal bars like some kind of security blanket. When I finally lost service completely, about 5 miles from the cabin, I actually pulled over and had what I can only describe as a panic attack.
Tell me about that moment.
Picture this, Tony. 52-year-old man in a BMW, hyperventilating on the side of a dirt road because he can't check his email. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, thinking about all the urgent messages that might be piling up, all the fires that might be burning without me there to put them out.
What snapped you out of it?
A red-tailed hawk. Sounds ridiculous, but this magnificent bird landed on my hood and just stared at me through the windshield. We looked at each other for maybe 30 seconds, and I swear I could see something like pity in its eyes, like it was thinking, "You poor, confused creature, don't you know where you are?"
And where were you?
Home. I didn't know it yet, but I was finally home. Not the cabin, that was just a building. But that forest, that silence, that space to breathe without someone demanding a quarterly report on my oxygen consumption. For the first time in decades, I was somewhere that didn't want anything from me.
But surely there were challenges. You mentioned the terror, the isolation.
Chuckles. Oh, the challenges were just beginning. That first night, I nearly burned the place down trying to figure out the wood stove. Spent 2 hours trying to light a fire with soggy matches and newspaper, filling the whole cabin with smoke. Finally got a flame going around midnight, then lay awake, convinced I was going to die of carbon monoxide poisoning.
Not exactly the peaceful retreat you'd imagined?
I hadn't imagined anything, to be honest. The whole thing was so impulsive, so desperate. I'd packed like I was going on a weekend trip. 3 days worth of clothes, a bag of groceries, and my laptop. My laptop, Tony. I brought a laptop to a cabin with no electricity.
Laughs, old habits die hard.
The funny thing is, I kept opening it anyway. Pure muscle memory. I'd wake up, reach for the laptop, remember where I was, then just sit there staring at the blank screen like it might magically connect to the internet through sheer force of will.
How long did it take for that impulse to fade?
Longer than I'd like to admit. Maybe 2 weeks before I stopped reflexively checking for emails that weren't coming. But you know what's strange? The silence that had terrified me that first night started becoming something else entirely.
What kind of something else?
A conversation. I know that sounds crazy, but the forest has its own language once you learn to listen. The way the wind moves through different types of trees. Pines whisper, oaks murmur, birches actually seem to giggle when the breeze hits them right. And the wildlife. God, the wildlife.
Tell me about the wildlife. This is northern Michigan, right? What were you sharing the woods with?
Everything. White-tailed deer that would graze right outside my windows at dawn. A family of foxes that had a den somewhere near the creek. Black bears. Saw my first one on day 4, going through what I'd foolishly thought was a bear-proof trash can.
Laughs. How bear-proof was it?
About as bear-proof as a paper bag. I watched this massive female just pop the lid off like she was opening a jar of pickles. She looked at me standing there in my bathrobe, gave me what I can only describe as a dismissive snort, and went back to sorting through my garbage like she was conducting a quality inspection.
Were you afraid?
In that moment, no, which surprised me. She was so businesslike about it, so professional. Like she was saying, "Look, this is my neighborhood, and you're clearly new here, so let me show you how things work." I actually found it comforting. Here was someone who knew what she was doing.
Someone who belonged there.
Exactly. And I started paying attention to all the creatures who belonged there. The raccoons, with their tiny human-like hands washing food in the creek. The great blue heron who fished the same spot every morning at exactly 7:15. An old porcupine who'd waddle past my cabin every evening like he was commuting home from work.
You were building a neighborhood of sorts.
I was learning that I'd never actually left civilization. I'd just found a different kind of community, one that operated on older rules, simpler principles. The animals didn't care about my quarterly projections or my portfolio performance. They cared about whether I was going to leave food scraps where they could find them and whether I was going to respect their space.
That sounds almost liberating.
It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I'd spent so many years being important, being needed, being the guy with all the answers. Suddenly, I was just another creature trying to figure out how to keep a fire burning and where to find clean water.
And that humbling experience, how did it affect you?
Long pause. It started teaching me the difference between being busy and being alive, Tony. For the first time in decades, I had nowhere to be but where I was. Nothing to do but what needed doing. And you know what needed doing? Simple things. Splitting wood, pumping water, watching the sun set behind the tree line.
Simple, but not necessarily easy.
God, no. I was soft, Tony. 23 years of desk work had turned me into this pale, weak thing that got winded, splitting kindling. My hands blistered from the axe handle. My back ached from sleeping on that ancient mattress. But there was something honest about those aches. Something real.
Real in a way your corporate life hadn't been?
My corporate life was all abstractions. Numbers on screens, promises in emails, strategies in PowerPoint slides. But when you split wood, you either have firewood or you don't. When you pump water, you either have something to drink or you go thirsty. The feedback was immediate, honest. No spinning, no politics, no quarterly reviews.
It sounds like you were discovering something important about yourself.
I was discovering that I'd forgotten who I was underneath all those business suits and mission statements. Stripped away from the job title in the corner office and the constant validation of being indispensable, I had to figure out what was actually left.
And what was left, Marcus?
Pause. That's what I was about to find out. Because right around week 3, when I was starting to think I might actually survive this hermit experiment, the forest sent me my first real teacher.
So, Marcus, you've been up there in the woods for what, 3 months now? I have to ask, what does a typical morning look like when you wake up in that cabin?
Long pause. You know, Tony, that's probably the first time anyone's asked me about a typical anything in years. Back in the city, mornings were all panic and caffeine. Up here, I wake up when my body decides it's ready. No alarm clock screaming at me, just the sound of wind through the pines and maybe a woodpecker working on something nearby.
That sounds almost too peaceful. What's the cabin like? Help me picture where you're having these quiet mornings.
It's nothing fancy. One room, really. Stone fireplace that actually works, thank God, because October nights get cold fast up here. Previous owner left behind. This old wooden table, scarred up from years of use. I sit there with my coffee, black now, since I ran out of cream weeks ago, and I can see straight out through the front window to this meadow that stretches maybe 50 yards before the tree line starts again.
And you're completely alone out there? No neighbors for miles?
That was the plan, anyway. Chuckle's nearest house is probably 8 miles down the mountain road. I picked this place specifically because it was isolated. After 23 years of corner offices and conference rooms full of people who only spoke in quarterly projections, I thought silence was what I needed.
You mentioned you left a 6-figure job. That's a pretty dramatic change, Marcus. What was that last day like?
Pause. I remember sitting in my office at Henderson and Associates. I was senior partner there, and I was looking at this email from a client. Nothing unusual about it, just another demand for results yesterday on a project we'd barely started. But something about the tone, the way they wrote we expect immediate action on this matter, just broke something in me.
What do you mean, broke something?
I started shaking, Tony. Not nervously, but angry shaking. Here I was, 54 years old, successful by every measure society uses, and I realized I hadn't felt genuine joy in probably 5 years. Every morning was just endurance. Every client meeting was theater. I was performing the role of someone who cared about profit margins and market positioning.
So, you just walked away?
Not immediately. I sat there for another 2 hours, staring at that email. Then I opened my laptop and started searching for remote cabins for rent. Found this place online. Owner was some guy who inherited it from his uncle and just wanted someone to keep an eye on it through winter. I sent him a message, got a response within an hour, and drove up the next weekend to see it.
What did you tell people? Your colleagues, friends?
Bitter laugh. That was the wake-up call, Tony. When I tried to think of who I'd need to explain this to, the list was embarrassingly short. Work colleagues who'd forget me in 6 months. A few acquaintances I played golf with sometimes. My ex-wife remarried years ago, lives in Phoenix now. Kids are grown and scattered across the country, busy with their own lives.
That must have been a lonely realization.
Lonely, but clarifying. I'd spent so much time building a career that I'd forgotten to build a life. The cabin felt like a chance to strip everything down to basics. Just me, the woods, and whatever version of myself I'd find without all the noise.
How did those first few weeks go? Was the silence everything you'd hoped for?
Pause. The first week was bliss, I'll admit. Sleeping in, reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years, taking long walks. I felt like I was detoxing from something toxic. But by the second week, the quiet started feeling different. Heavier, maybe.
Heavier how?
When you're used to constant stimulation, emails, phone calls, meetings, sudden silence can be overwhelming. I'd catch myself talking out loud just to hear a human voice. Started having full conversations with myself while chopping firewood. Well, Marcus, looks like rain today. Better stack this wood under cover, Marcus.
Laughs that doesn't sound entirely unhealthy.
Maybe not. But it made me realize how dependent I'd become on external validation. In the corporate world, someone's always responding to you, arguing with you, needing something from you. Out here, I could go days without speaking to another soul. The mountain doesn't care about my opinions on quarterly earnings.
You mentioned a park ranger earlier. Have you had much contact with the outside world?
Pause. There's this ranger. Comes by maybe once a week to check on things. Friendly enough. Always wants to chat about weather patterns and wildlife activity. I've been polite, but not exactly encouraging deeper conversation. Part of me came up here to escape people, remember?
But something's changing about that, isn't it?
Longer pause, maybe. Last week, he mentioned seeing fresh bear tracks near the creek that runs behind my cabin. Instead of just thanking him for the warning, I found myself asking questions. What kind of bear? How recent were the tracks? What should I do if I encounter one?
Practical questions.
Sure, but it was the first real conversation I'd had in weeks. And afterward, sitting alone by my fire that night, I realized I'd enjoyed it. Not just the information, but the exchange itself. The way he got animated talking about black bear behavior. How he'd pause to make sure I was following his explanation.
That sounds like connection, Marcus.
Quietly, yeah. And that scares me a little, Tony. I came up here to prove I could be self-sufficient. That I didn't need the approval or company of other people to find peace. But maybe what I'm learning is that isolation and peace aren't the same thing.
What makes you say that?
Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evenings watching the sun set behind the pine trees, and it's beautiful, Tony. Absolutely beautiful. But there's this nagging feeling that beauty experienced alone is somehow incomplete, like I'm only getting half the experience.
Have you thought about reaching out to your children? Or old friends?
Long pause every day. But what would I say? Hey, remember me? Your father who was always too busy for your school plays but now has nothing but time to watch sunsets? I burned a lot of bridges with my single-minded focus on work, Tony. I'm not sure they'd want to hear from me.
You might be surprised. People change. Circumstances change.
Maybe. Right now, I'm still figuring out who I am without the suits and the meetings and the constant pressure to perform. This cabin, these woods, they're like a laboratory for rediscovering myself. But I'm starting to suspect that whatever I discover, I'll want to share it with someone.
It sounds like you're already beginning to understand something important about solitude versus loneliness.
Pause. The ranger mentioned there's an old-timer who lives even deeper in the woods. Been up here for decades, apparently. Part of me is curious about his story, about how someone makes a life in a place like this. But part of me wonders if that's my future, becoming the strange hermit that park rangers warn new visitors about.
What would be wrong with that?
Thoughtful pause. I'm not sure anything would be wrong with it, Tony, but I'm beginning to think it might not be right for me either.
Marcus, when you first arrived at that cabin, what did you actually see when you stepped out of your car?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I'd been driving for almost 6 hours straight, and my hands were still shaking from the caffeine and adrenaline. The first thing that hit me wasn't what I saw, but what I didn't hear. No traffic, no construction, no sirens. Just this overwhelming quiet that felt almost aggressive after 30 years of city noise.
Aggressive quiet. That's a fascinating way to put it.
The cabin itself was smaller than I'd imagined from the rental photos. Weathered cedar logs, a green metal roof with pine needles scattered across it like nature's confetti. There was this massive oak tree leaning over the front porch, probably been there since before my grandfather was born. The whole place felt like it was slowly being reclaimed by the forest, and I remember thinking that's exactly what I wanted for myself.
To be reclaimed?
To disappear, I suppose. The corporate world had stripped me down to nothing but quarterly reports and profit margins. I figured if I could just fade into the woods like that cabin was doing, maybe I'd find whatever was left of the real me underneath all that noise.
Tell me about that corporate world you were running from. What did your days look like before this transformation?
Bitter laugh days? Tony, I didn't have days. I had these endless streams of fluorescent lit hours that all blended together. My corner office on the 42nd floor had windows that didn't open, looking out at other buildings full of windows that didn't open. I'd get to work before sunrise, leave after sunset, and sometimes I'd go weeks without feeling actual sunlight on my skin.
That sounds suffocating.
The worst part was how proud I was of it. I wore that exhaustion like a badge of honor. 60-hour weeks, 80-hour weeks during quarterly pushes. My assistant would order my meals. My dry cleaner picked up my suits. My housekeeper kept my apartment running. I was making more money than my father ever dreamed of, but I was living less life than anyone should.
When did you realize something had to change?
There was this moment, about 2 months before I left. I was in a board meeting presenting our third quarter numbers, and I looked around that mahogany table at 12 other executives. Every single one of them looked like me. Same tired eyes, same expensive suits hanging loose because we all survived on coffee and stress. Same way of checking phones every 30 seconds like we were expecting news that would change everything.
What happened in that moment?
I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed. Really laughed. Not just that polite conference room chuckle when someone makes a joke about market volatility. I couldn't remember the last time I'd cooked a meal, or read a book that wasn't about business strategy, or had a conversation about something other than productivity metrics.
So you started planning your escape?
Not right away. First, I tried what everyone tries. I bought a gym membership I never used, signed up for a meditation app I opened twice, even made an appointment with a therapist that I canceled 3 times because of work emergencies. But the cabin idea came from my uncle's stories.
Your uncle?
My father's brother. He used to tell these incredible stories about living off the grid up in Montana for a few years in his 20s. Said it was the only time in his life he ever really knew who he was. I always thought he was just being romantic about poverty. But when I hit rock bottom, those stories started sounding less like cautionary tales and more like instruction manuals.
What was rock bottom for you?
Pause. I fell asleep in my office chair on a Friday night and woke up Sunday morning. The cleaning crew found me there, still in my suit from Thursday, drooling on a contract worth $47 million. The security guard who let me out said it wasn't the first time he'd seen someone do that. Said it like it was perfectly normal.
That must have been a wake-up call.
That Sunday, I walked 15 blocks home instead of calling a car, and I noticed things I'd never seen before. A little community garden squeezed between 2 apartment buildings, an old man feeding pigeons on a bench, children playing in a pocket park with their grandmother watching. All this life happening right in my neighborhood while I'd been sleepwalking through my own existence.
So you found the cabin online?
Spent 3 weeks researching remote rentals, reading survival blogs, ordering camping gear I didn't know how to use. My secretary thought I was planning a very elaborate vacation. I never told her, or anyone really, that I wasn't planning to come back.
What did you think you'd find out there in the wilderness?
Honestly, Tony, I thought I'd find silence. I thought if I could just get far enough away from the noise and demands and constant connectivity, I'd discover this Zen-like peace. I imagined myself meditating by a stream, chopping firewood with some kind of noble purpose, maybe even growing a beard and learning to whittle.
Chuckling, the classic city man finds enlightenment fantasy.
Exactly. I thought peace was the absence of complication. I thought if I could just strip away everything modern and demanding, I'd find this simple, pure version of myself waiting underneath. I packed like I was going to become Thoreau, with books about self-reliance and notebooks for profound wilderness insights.
But that's not what happened.
Laughs, not even close. Within the first week, I realized that silence isn't peaceful when you're not at peace with yourself, and isolation isn't freedom when you're running away from connection. But I was stubborn, and it took some very persistent neighbors to teach me that lesson.
Neighbors? I thought you said the cabin was remote.
Grinning it was, but apparently I hadn't considered all the different kinds of neighbors you might find in the middle of nowhere.
So, Marcus, you'd been at the cabin for what, 3 weeks at this point? How were you settling into the routine?
3 weeks, 2 days, and about 16 hours, but who was counting? Laughs. I had my morning coffee ritual down to a science. Wake up at dawn, boil water on the camp stove, sit on the porch steps with my mug, and listen to absolutely nothing. It was exactly what I thought I wanted.
Thought you wanted. Past tense there. What changed?
Well, Tony, that's when I met my first real neighbor. And I use the term neighbor loosely because this particular individual lived about a quarter mile through the woods and had never paid property taxes in his life.
Another person living out there?
Not exactly a person, no. Picture this. I'm sitting there on day 22, enjoying my sacred morning silence, when I hear this rustling in the bushes. Figured it was a squirrel or maybe a bird. Then this masked face pokes out from behind my woodpile.
A raccoon.
The biggest, boldest raccoon I'd ever seen. This guy had to be pushing 25 pounds, and he's just standing there staring at me like I'm the one trespassing. So I do what any rational person would do. I ignore him and go back to my coffee.
But he didn't ignore you.
Oh no, this was just the opening act. 5 minutes later, he's dragged his entire family out for the show. Mama raccoon, 3 little ones, and what I can only assume was teenage raccoon with serious attitude problems.
They were checking out the new resident.
More like conducting a full property inspection. The big guy. I started calling him chairman of the board because of how he carried himself. He walks right up to my porch steps, sits down, looks me dead in the eye.
What did you do?
I told him the property wasn't zoned for wildlife conventions. He tilted his head like he was considering my argument, then proceeded to knock over my garbage can.
Laughs, your first neighbors weren't quite what you'd expected.
Tony, I came out there to get away from pushy neighbors, demanding schedules, people wanting things from me all the time. And here's this raccoon family treating my cabin like their personal vacation rental.
How did that make you feel? Really?
Pause, frustrated at first. Here I am, trying to find some peace and quiet, and I've got this furry committee holding daily meetings in my front yard. But then something strange happened.
Tell me about that.
Well, day 23, same morning routine. Coffee, porch, silence. Except now I'm kind of watching for them. Not that I cared, you understand. Just keeping an eye on my property.
Of course. Purely practical.
Exactly. And right on schedule, here comes the chairman with his entourage. But this time, one of the little ones is limping. Nothing serious, just favoring his left paw. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, that's unfortunate, but it's not my problem.
But you kept watching.
For about 10 minutes. Then I went inside, got some crackers from my emergency stash, and left them by the woodpile. Told myself it was just common courtesy.
How did the chairman respond to your hospitality?
He gave me this look, Marcus, like he knew exactly what I was doing and why I was doing it. Then he supervised while his family had breakfast. Very dignified about the whole thing.
This became a regular arrangement?
Daily briefings at 0700 hours. I'd bring the refreshments, they'd provide the entertainment. The teenage one, I called her drama queen. She'd always try to grab more than her share. The little guy with the hurt paw. He was more polite about it.
You were developing relationships.
I was feeding some raccoons, Tony. Let's not get carried away.
Were you, though? Just feeding them?
Long pause. I started talking to them. Nothing fancy, just commentary. Morning, Chairman. Drama queen, leave some for your siblings. Little guy, how's the paw today? That sort of thing.
And how did they respond?
They listened. I know that sounds crazy, but they actually listened. The chairman would cock his head when I spoke. Drama queen would chatter back sometimes. It was like having breakfast conversation without all the human complications.
What kind of complications were you thinking about?
You know, the usual. Small talk about weather you both already experienced. Questions about weekend plans when you just want to drink your coffee. Performance reviews disguised as casual conversation.
So, the raccoons were better company than your former colleagues.
The raccoons didn't want anything from me except maybe some crackers and basic respect for their family dynamics. No hidden agendas, no corporate politics, no expectations about quarterly projections.
But something happened to change this arrangement, didn't it?
Pause. Yeah. Day 27. I came out for our usual morning meeting, and there was someone else sitting on my porch steps.
Another raccoon?
A park ranger. Khaki uniform, official badge, clipboard full of what I could only assume were regulations I was probably violating.
What was your first thought?
Honestly, that someone had reported me for fraternizing with local wildlife. Maybe there were rules about feeding raccoons. Maybe I needed permits for interspecies breakfast meetings.
Were you worried?
I was annoyed, Tony. Here I'd finally found something simple and peaceful, and now there was going to be paperwork involved.
How did the raccoons react to this intruder?
That's the interesting part. The chairman took one look at this ranger and just settled in like he was expecting him, like this was all part of some plan I wasn't aware of.
What did the ranger say to you?
He looked up from his clipboard, smiled like we were old friends, and said, "You must be Marcus. I'm Ranger Patterson. Mind if we chat about your new living situation?"
He knew who you were.
He knew my name, how long I'd been there, probably my coffee preferences and my raccoon feeding schedule. And he said it all with this tone like we were about to have a very interesting conversation whether I wanted to or not.
Were you ready for that conversation?
Tony, I'd spent almost a month specifically avoiding conversations with other human beings. Ready wasn't exactly the word I'd use.
So, Marcus, you'd been in the cabin for what? About 2 weeks by this point. How were you settling into the rhythm of wilderness life?
Well, Tony, I thought I had everything figured out. I'd established my little routines, you know? Morning coffee on the porch, chopping wood, reading by the fire. I was actually starting to feel proud of myself for surviving out there completely alone.
That sense of self-reliance must have felt good after everything you'd been through in the corporate world.
Exactly. For the first time in years, I wasn't checking emails or answering to anyone. It was just me and the forest, and I was convinced that was all I needed. I remember thinking I could live like that indefinitely.
But something happened that changed that perspective.
Long pause. Oh, something happened all right. It was a Tuesday morning, unseasonably warm for October. I was sitting on my porch with my coffee, feeling pretty smug about my newfound independence, when I heard this rustling in the bushes near my woodpile.
What kind of rustling? Bear rustling or something smaller?
That's exactly what I was trying to figure out. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer, but the sounds were too deliberate, too persistent. So I got up to investigate, and that's when I saw them.
Them?
3 raccoons, a mother and 2 babies, probably born that spring. They'd gotten into my garbage somehow, even though I thought I'd secured it properly. There was trash scattered everywhere, and the mother was teaching her little ones how to open containers.
I imagine that was frustrating after you'd worked so hard to organize your space.
Frustrated doesn't begin to cover it, Tony. I completely lost it. Here I was, trying to build this perfect, controlled environment, and these animals were treating my camp like their personal buffet. I started yelling and waving my arms, trying to scare them off.
How did they react to your outburst?
The babies scattered immediately, chittering in fear. But the mother, she just sat there for a moment, looking at me with these incredibly intelligent eyes. And in that look, I saw something that stopped me cold.
What did you see in her expression?
Recognition, maybe. Or judgment. It was like she was saying, "Really? This is who you are? You're going to terrorize a mother trying to feed her children?" The babies were crying from wherever they'd hidden, and suddenly I felt like the biggest fool in the world.
That must have been a powerful moment of self-reflection.
It was devastating, actually. Here, I'd run away from the city because I was tired of being surrounded by selfish, aggressive people, and the first real challenge to my peace, I responded with the exact same aggression I'd been trying to escape.
So what did you do?
I sat down right there in the dirt, surrounded by my scattered garbage, and I started laughing. Not happy laughing, Tony. It was bitter, almost hysterical. The absurdity of it all just hit me like a freight train.
The absurdity of what, specifically?
That I'd spent 43 years learning how to be one kind of person, and 2 weeks in the woods wasn't going to magically transform me into someone else. I was still the same impatient, controlling man who'd burned out in corporate America. The location had changed, but I hadn't.
That's a hard realization to face, especially when you're already feeling vulnerable.
The worst part was the silence afterward. The raccoons were gone, the forest felt empty, and I was alone with this crushing understanding that maybe I was the problem all along. Maybe it wasn't the city or my job or other people. Maybe it was just me.
How long did you sit there with that realization?
Hours, probably. I kept replaying that mother raccoon's expression, thinking about those frightened babies. I'd become exactly what I'd run away from, a bully who used anger to solve problems.
Did this change how you saw your time in the wilderness?
Everything changed, Tony. I realized I hadn't come to the woods to find peace. I'd come to hide from my own nature. And that mother raccoon, without saying a word, had forced me to confront the fact that you can't run away from yourself.
It sounds like this encounter became a turning point for you.
Pause. It was the beginning of understanding that isolation wasn't healing me. It was just giving my worst impulses room to grow in the dark. Those raccoons didn't know it, but they'd just handed me the most important lesson of my life.
Marcus, you've been in the woods for a few weeks now. How are you handling the changes? The silence? The isolation?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I thought I wanted the silence. I really did. But silence isn't what I found out there.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the woods aren't silent at all. There's this constant symphony. Birds calling to each other, branches creaking, leaves rustling. And then there are my neighbors.
Neighbors? I thought you said the cabin was isolated.
Chuckles the raccoons. There's a whole family of them. The mother and 3 kits. They've decided my porch is prime real estate.
How do you feel about these uninvited guests?
At first I was annoyed. Here I am, trying to escape from everyone and everything, and these little bandits are treating my place like a bed and breakfast. But watching them. Pause. There's something about the way the mother protects those babies, teaches them.
It sounds like they're showing you something about family.
Maybe. I don't know. I keep thinking about my own kids, Tony. How I missed so many dinners, so many bedtime stories. I was always at the office, always chasing the next deal, the next promotion.
Do you regret those choices?
Silence. That's the question, isn't it? I told myself I was providing for them, building a future. But what kind of future did I actually build? One where their father was a stranger who showed up stressed and exhausted, checking emails during family time.
When did you first realize something had to change?
There was this moment about 6 months before I left. My daughter, Sarah, she had a school play. I promised I'd be there. Promised. But then this client crisis came up, and I chose the meeting over her performance.
How did that make you feel?
She didn't even seem surprised when I missed it. That's what broke me, Tony. My own daughter expected me to let her down. That's when I knew I'd become someone I didn't recognize.
So the cabin was your way of hitting the reset button?
I thought so. I figured if I could just get away from all the noise, all the pressure, I'd find some clarity. Figure out who I really am underneath all that corporate armor.
And are you finding that person?
Pause. It's complicated. Some days I feel like I'm making progress. I wake up when my body wants to wake up, not when an alarm screams at me. I eat when I'm hungry. I think when I want to think.
But other days?
Other days I feel lost. Like I've spent so many years being defined by my job title, my salary, my achievements, that without those things. Pause, I'm not sure what's left.
That sounds frightening.
It is. And then I watch these raccoons and I think about how they just know how to be raccoons. They don't question it. They don't have existential crises about their purpose in life.
Do you think humans have lost that instinct?
Maybe some of us have. Or maybe we've buried it under so many layers of expectation and responsibility that we can't find it anymore.
Tell me about your daily routine out there. How are you structuring your time?
That's just it, Tony. I'm trying not to structure it. For the first time in 20 years, I don't have meetings, deadlines, schedules. I'm learning to let the day unfold naturally.
Is that as liberating as it sounds?
Some days, yes. Other days, it's terrifying. I'll catch myself reaching for my phone to check emails that aren't there anymore from a job I no longer have.
Old habits die hard.
Exactly. And then there's this park ranger who keeps stopping by. Cheerful young woman who talks like she's been caffeinated since birth. Part of me wants to tell her to leave me alone, but there's something refreshing about her energy. She sees wonder in everything. A bird's nest, a new wildflower, the way morning light hits the lake. Things I would have walked past without noticing when I was caught up in my old life.
It sounds like she's teaching you to see differently.
Maybe. Or maybe she's reminding me how to see it all. I spent so many years looking at spreadsheets and profit margins that I forgot there was a whole world happening right outside my office window.
What's the hardest part about this transition for you, Marcus?
Long pause, the quiet moments, when I'm alone with my thoughts, when there's nowhere to run, no meeting to attend, no crisis to solve, just me and the reality of what I've become. That's when the real work begins.
Marcus, you mentioned earlier that the first few weeks in the cabin were brutal, but something shifted after that encounter with the park ranger. How did you start dealing with all that anger you were carrying?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I think I was so focused on running away from everything that I forgot. I was also running away from myself. The anger didn't disappear just because I changed my zip code.
What did that look like in practice? I imagine those long nights alone gave you plenty of time to think.
Too much time. I'd sit there with my bourbon, replaying every backstabbing meeting, every sleepless night working on projects that got shelved, every time I chose the office over dinner with friends. The woods were quiet, but my head was screaming.
And Sarah, the park ranger, she started checking in regularly after that first visit?
Every few days. At first, I thought she was just doing her job, making sure the crazy city guy wasn't going to burn down the forest. But she had this way of asking questions that got under my skin.
What kind of questions?
Simple ones, like, what did you do today? Not what did you accomplish, or how productive were you? Just what did you do? I remember one afternoon I told her I spent 3 hours watching a spider build a web on my porch. In my old life, that would have been 3 wasted hours.
But it wasn't waste to you anymore?
Pause. I was starting to understand the difference between being busy and being present. That spider knew exactly what it was doing. No rush, no deadline, just building something beautiful one strand at a time.
You're describing a fundamental shift in how you measured your days. Was that frightening?
Terrifying. I'd spent 25 years climbing ladders, hitting targets, measuring everything by the numbers. Now I'm out here learning that the best part of my day might be watching a sunset or hearing an owl call. My old colleagues would have had me committed.
Speaking of your old life, were you staying in touch with anyone from the city?
I had my phone, but I kept it off most of the time. There were messages piling up. My assistant, a few clients, some friends asking if I'd lost my mind. I wasn't ready for those conversations yet.
What were you afraid they'd say?
Long pause. That they were right. That I was having some kind of breakdown, that I needed to come back to reality, get help, return to being the Marcus they knew, the Marcus who had his life together.
But did you feel like that Marcus had his life together?
God, no. That Marcus was held together with stress, caffeine, and sheer willpower. I was one bad quarterly report away from a heart attack. But admitting that meant admitting I'd wasted decades chasing things that didn't matter.
Those are heavy realizations to work through alone. How did Sarah help with that process?
She didn't try to fix me, which was revolutionary. She'd sit on my porch, drink terrible coffee from my camp stove, and just listen. Sometimes she'd share stories about other people who'd come to the woods looking for something.
Other people like you?
Not exactly like me, but people who'd lost their way somehow. A teacher who'd burned out after 30 years, a widow who needed to remember who she was beyond being someone's wife. Sarah said the woods don't judge, they just hold space for people to figure things out.
That must have been comforting, knowing you weren't the only one who'd needed to step away from everything.
It was, but it also made me realize I couldn't hide forever. Sarah never said it directly, but I could tell she was waiting for me to start asking different questions.
What do you mean?
Instead of how do I get away from my old life, or how do I avoid going back? She was waiting for me to ask, what do I actually want? And who am I when nobody's watching?
Those are much harder questions to answer.
Exactly. And they require you to be honest about what you've been avoiding. I wasn't just angry at my job or my boss or the corporate world. I was angry at myself for staying so long in a life that was slowly killing me.
How long did it take before you were ready to face those deeper questions?
Pause. About 6 weeks in, something happened that forced my hand. I discovered I wasn't the only one living in these woods, and my new neighbor was about to teach me lessons I never saw coming.
Marcus, we've been talking for a while now about your escape to the woods, but I'm sensing there's something deeper you haven't shared yet. What was really driving you away from that corporate life?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I thought I knew the answer to that question when I first packed my bags. I told myself it was about the stress, the endless meetings, the performance reviews. But sitting here now, months later, I realize I was running from something much more personal.
What do you mean by that?
My father. He died 3 years before I made the move to the cabin, and I never really dealt with it. He was this larger-than-life figure, you know, built his own construction company from nothing, worked 16-hour days, provided everything for our family. And there I was, pushing papers around in a glass tower, making more money than he ever dreamed of, but feeling completely empty.
It sounds like you were carrying some guilt about your success.
More than guilt, Tony. It was like I was living a life he couldn't understand, and now he was gone, so I'd never get the chance to explain it to him. Or maybe get the chance to understand it myself. He used to say that a man's work should leave something behind, something you could point to and say, I built that.
And your corporate work didn't feel like building anything.
Exactly. I was optimizing supply chains and maximizing shareholder value, but at the end of the day, what did I have to show for it? A bigger apartment, a fancier car, a retirement account I might not live to enjoy. My father built houses, Tony. Families still live in houses he built with his own hands 40 years ago.
So, when you went to the woods, were you looking for that kind of tangible legacy?
I thought I was looking for peace and quiet, but you're right. I think I was trying to find some way to honor his memory, to do something real with my hands. The first few weeks, I spent every daylight hour working on that cabin, fixing the roof, reinforcing the foundation, building new shelves. My hands were bleeding, my back was screaming, but for the first time in years I felt like I was doing something he would have respected.
That must have been both satisfying and painful.
It was. And lonely, God, it was lonely. I'd finish a project and look around for someone to share it with, someone to appreciate the work. That's when I started really missing him, not just the idea of him, but the actual conversations we used to have. He had this way of looking at a piece of work and finding exactly the right thing to say about it.
What kind of things would he say?
Chuckles softly, he'd walk around whatever you'd built, run his hands along the edges, test the joints. Then he'd nod and say something like, "That'll hold." Coming from him, those 2 words meant everything. It meant you'd done honest work. Work that would last.
And you were out there building things with no one to tell you that'll hold.
Right. I started talking to myself, Tony. Having full conversations with him in my head while I worked. Asking him if I was doing things right. Imagining what he'd say about the way I was handling the tools. I probably looked crazy to anyone watching, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world.
It sounds like you were processing grief that you'd put aside for years.
I was. In the corporate world, you get 3 days bereavement leave, and then you're expected to be back at full capacity. I never had time to really sit with the loss, to figure out what his death meant for how I wanted to live my life. Out there in the woods, with nothing but time and manual labor, all of that finally caught up with me.
That must have been overwhelming.
There were days I'd just sit on the porch and cry, Tony, 52 years old, sobbing like a child because I missed my dad. But there were other days when I felt closer to him than I had since I was a teenager working construction with him during summer breaks. The physical work, the problem-solving, the satisfaction of fixing something that was broken, it all connected me back to lessons he'd tried to teach me.
What were some of those lessons?
That there's dignity in all honest work, but there's something special about work that improves the world in a tangible way. That taking shortcuts always costs more in the end. That the best way to think through a problem is with your hands busy doing something useful. He used to say that idle hands make for an idle mind, but working hands make for a clear mind.
And you found that to be true during your time at the cabin?
Absolutely. Some of my clearest thinking happened while I was splitting wood or repairing the dock. My mind would wander, but in a productive way. I'd work through memories, examine old decisions, imagine different futures. It was like meditation, but with calluses.
Did you feel like you were becoming more like your father?
In some ways, yes. But I also started to understand that he and I were different people, and that was okay. He found his purpose in building homes for families. I was still searching for what my version of that might look like. The cabin work was satisfying, but I knew it wasn't my final answer.
What made you realize that?
Well, Marcus, I started to notice that the projects I was most proud of were the ones that somehow connected me to other people. Like when I built that bird feeder and watched a family of cardinals discover it, or when I reinforced the bridge over the creek and imagined future hikers crossing it safely. The work felt most meaningful when it was in service of something larger than just my own comfort.
That's interesting. Your father built for families, and you were starting to build for the community, even if it was just the wildlife community at first.
Exactly. And I think that's when I started to understand that my father's real legacy wasn't the houses themselves. It was the principle behind them. He believed in contributing something lasting and valuable to the world. The form that takes can be different for different people, but the principle remains the same.
Did that realization change how you felt about your corporate career?
It did. I stopped seeing it as a complete waste and started recognizing that it had taught me valuable skills. Project management, strategic thinking, working with different kinds of people. Maybe those skills could be applied to something more meaningful than quarterly profit margins.
It sounds like you were starting to envision a different kind of future.
I was, Tony. But first, I had to learn some lessons about solitude that I wasn't expecting. Because even with this new clarity about honoring my father's memory, I was still very much alone out there. And that isolation was about to teach me something crucial about what I really needed.
Marcus, we've been talking for a while now about your early days at the cabin, but I sense there's something you haven't told me yet. Something that brought you to a deeper understanding about why you really left the city.
Long pause. You're perceptive, Tony. There was a moment, maybe 6 weeks into my time there, when I found something in the cabin that changed everything.
What did you find?
A journal, hidden in a loose floorboard near the fireplace. The previous owner had left it behind, probably forgotten about it. An old man named William, who'd lived there for 30 years before me.
And you read it?
I almost didn't. Felt like trespassing, you know. But curiosity got the better of me. The first entry was dated 1987. He wrote about coming to the woods after losing his wife to cancer. Said he couldn't bear to be around people anymore because their sympathy felt like salt in the wound.
That must have resonated with you in some way.
It shook me, Tony. Here I was, thinking I was so unique in my pain, so justified in my retreat from the world. But William's words were like looking in a mirror. He wrote about the same anger, the same exhaustion with people's expectations and judgments.
Did he find what he was looking for in those woods?
That's the thing. I spent 3 days reading that journal cover to cover. 30 years of entries, and I watched this man's evolution on paper. The early years were bitter, just like mine. He wrote about how peaceful it was to not have to pretend anymore, not have to smile at colleagues or make small talk.
But something changed?
Gradually, yes. Around year 5, his tone started shifting. He began writing about the animals, the seasons, the small daily rituals that grounded him. But then, maybe 10 years in, he started writing about loneliness differently.
How so?
He stopped celebrating it. He wrote this one entry that I'll never forget. He said, "I came here to escape the noise of other people's lives, but I realize now I was just afraid they'd see how empty my own life had become.
That's a profound realization.
It gets deeper, Tony. In his later entries, he wrote about watching families camp nearby, hearing children laugh by the lake. He described sitting on his porch, hidden from view, just listening to their conversations during dinner. He called it borrowed joy.
Borrowed joy. That's a beautiful phrase, but also quite sad.
Heartbreaking is what it was. This man spent decades convinced that solitude was healing him, when really he was just postponing the harder work of figuring out how to connect with people again.
How did his story end?
The last entry was dated just 2 months before I arrived. He wrote about his nephew finding the cabin, insisting William move to an assisted living facility. William was angry about it, but then he wrote something that stopped me cold.
What did he write?
Maybe it's time. Maybe I've learned everything these woods can teach me, and the rest of my education needs to happen around people again. I'm scared, but I'm more scared of dying here with all this peace I've found and no one to share it with.
And that changed your perspective on your own journey.
Completely. I realized I was following the exact same path. The same justifications, the same gradual acceptance of isolation as a virtue rather than a wound I was nursing. William's journal became like a roadmap of where I was headed if I didn't change course.
But you'd only been there 6 weeks. William had 30 years.
That's what scared me most, Tony. How easy it would be to let years slip by. How each season of solitude makes the next one feel more justified, more necessary. I could see myself at 70, writing those same entries about borrowed joy, watching life happen at a distance.
So what did you do with this revelation?
I did something William never managed to do. I started taking small steps back toward people, but on my own terms. I began with simple acknowledgments when Ranger Sarah visited, then longer conversations. I started paying attention to the families who camped nearby instead of hiding from them.
You used his journal as a cautionary tale.
And as a gift. William showed me that solitude could be medicine, but it could also become a cage if you stayed too long. The woods taught me to be still enough to hear my own thoughts again, but they couldn't teach me how to share those thoughts with others. That was work I had to do in community.
Did you ever try to contact William? To thank him?
I tried, but he'd passed away that winter just a month after moving to the facility. But in a way, our conversation happened through those pages. He saved me from 30 years of beautiful, lonely exile.
Marcus, I have to ask about something that's been nagging at me. You've talked about Harold giving you all this wisdom about connection and community, but there's something that doesn't quite add up. How did a hermit who supposedly lived alone for decades know so much about relationships?
Long pause. You know, Tony, I wondered about that myself for the longest time. It wasn't until my last conversation with Harold that I understood.
What did you learn?
Harold wasn't actually a hermit. Not in the way I thought, anyway. He'd been coming to those woods for 30 years, yes. But he wasn't running away from people like I was.
What do you mean?
He was a widower, Tony. His wife Sarah had passed away from cancer, and they used to camp in those woods together every summer. After she died, he kept coming back. Not to escape the world, but to feel close to her.
So, he was never really isolated.
That's just it. He had a whole life back in town. He volunteered at the library twice a week, helped coach Little League, had coffee every Thursday with the same group of friends he'd known for 40 years. The cabin was his retreat, not his prison.
How did you find this out?
He invited me to come with him one Thursday. I almost said no because I thought we were just going into town for supplies. But we ended up at this little diner, and suddenly there were all these people greeting Harold like he was the mayor. Mrs. Peterson from the hardware store, Jim who ran the bait shop, elderly couples who'd known him and Sarah for decades.
That must have been quite a revelation.
I felt like such a fool, Tony. Here I was thinking I'd found this wise old sage who'd discovered the secret to living apart from the world, and instead, I'd found someone who understood that the secret was staying connected to it.
What did Harold say when he realized you'd misunderstood?
He laughed, that gentle laugh of his. He said, "Marcus, did you really think a man could gain wisdom about human nature by avoiding humans?" He told me he'd been watching me for months, seeing me make the same mistake he almost made after Sarah died,
Which was?
thinking that pain could be healed by shutting people out. Harold said he spent the first year after Sarah's death hiding in that cabin, angry at the world, convinced that solitude was the answer. But it nearly destroyed him.
What changed his mind?
The raccoon family, believe it or not. He said watching them care for each other, seeing how they worked together and looked out for one another, made him realize he was going against his own nature. Humans aren't meant to be alone, Tony. Even the animals knew that.
So when he started giving you advice about connection,
He was speaking from experience. Both the experience of having had a beautiful marriage and the experience of nearly losing himself when he tried to replace that connection with isolation. Every piece of wisdom he shared came from somewhere real.
this changes everything about your story, doesn't it? Looking back at those conversations.
Completely. When he talked about community, he wasn't speaking theoretically. When he encouraged me to be patient with you during your visits, he was drawing from years of maintaining friendships through good times and bad. When he talked about love requiring vulnerability, he was thinking about Sarah.
Did he ever talk about her directly?
Only once. The day before I decided to go back to the city. He showed me a photo of them together at the cabin, maybe 20 years younger. He said, "Marcus, I don't come here to hide from my grief. I come here to remember what made life worth living. There's a difference."
And that's when you understood.
That's when I realized I'd been doing exactly what Harold had warned against. I was hiding from my life instead of figuring out how to make it worth living. The peace I thought I'd found in those woods wasn't real peace. It was just postponement.
How did it feel to learn you'd been wrong about Harold all along?
Grateful, Tony. So incredibly grateful. Because it meant that everything he'd taught me wasn't coming from someone who'd given up on the world. It was coming from someone who'd chosen to stay engaged with it, even when it broke his heart. That's real wisdom.
No wonder his advice was so practical.
Exactly. Harold hadn't theorized his way to wisdom. He'd lived his way to it. And that made all the difference in whether I was willing to trust it enough to act on it.
Marcus, I have to ask about something that's been puzzling me. You mentioned earlier that the park ranger who first visited you seemed to know exactly what you needed to hear. How did she understand your situation so well?
Long pause. That's the thing, Tony. I've been dancing around this truth for most of our conversation, but you deserve the whole story.
Take your time.
Sarah wasn't just any park ranger. She was my wife.
Your wife?
Ex-wife, technically. We'd been divorced for 2 years when I ran to those woods. The corporate world didn't just burn me out professionally, Tony. It consumed everything. My marriage, my relationships, my sense of who I was outside of quarterly reports and client meetings.
So when she showed up at your cabin,
She'd been tracking my whereabouts through my credit card purchases, the cabin rental, the supplies. Sarah always was resourceful. She'd taken the park ranger job after our divorce, said she needed to be somewhere real after watching me disappear into that corporate machine.
that must have been quite a shock, seeing her there.
Devastating and healing at the same time. Here I was, running from everything, and the person I'd hurt most was the one checking to make sure I hadn't frozen to death in a snowstorm.
It reframes everything you've told me about those early conversations.
Completely. When she talked about people who come to the woods thinking they want to be alone, she was talking about me specifically. She knew my patterns, Tony. She knew I'd try to solve everything by cutting myself off from the world.
And the hermit, Walter. Did she know about him too?
She'd been quietly watching over him for months. When she realized I was serious about staying, she guided me toward him, knowing we'd help each other. She orchestrated my healing without me even realizing it.
That's remarkable, Marcus, but also raises a question about her motivations.
You mean why would she care enough to help the man who'd let work destroy their marriage?
Exactly.
Because she knew the real me was still in there somewhere. The man she'd married before the corporate world got its claws in. She was betting that the woods would strip away everything false and bring him back to the surface.
And did they?
We're having coffee again, Tony. Every Sunday morning, just like we used to.
Marcus, you mentioned that winter was approaching fast. How did that change things for you out there?
Long pause. Well, Tony, I'd been so focused on my daily routines with the raccoons, my conversations with Harold, even our weekly check-ins, that I hadn't really prepared for what isolation truly meant. Real isolation.
What do you mean by that?
The Park Service warned me they'd be closing the access road for 3 months. No supply runs, no emergency services. If something went wrong, I'd be completely on my own until spring thaw.
That must have been sobering. Were you ready for that level of solitude?
Chuckles softly, I thought I was. Remember, I came out here wanting to disappear from the world, but after months of building these connections, the idea of losing them felt terrifying.
So, what was the plan? How did you prepare?
Harold helped me stock up on essentials, canned goods, medical supplies, extra firewood. But the practical stuff was easy compared to the mental preparation. I kept thinking about my family back home, wondering if they even knew where I was.
Had you been in touch with them at all since leaving the city?
Pause, not really. A few text messages early on telling them I was fine, needed space, but nothing meaningful. And suddenly, I'm facing 3 months where even if I wanted to reach out, I couldn't.
That's when you started writing those letters, isn't it?
Exactly. Harold suggested it. Said writing helps clarify thoughts, even if you never send them. So I started writing to my brother, my parents, even my old business partner, trying to explain what I couldn't explain before I left.
What did those letters reveal to you about yourself?
That I'd been running from conversations I was afraid to have, afraid of admitting I'd failed, afraid of disappointing people, afraid of being vulnerable. But sitting there, facing months of silence, I realized the silence wasn't teaching me strength. It was teaching me cowardice.
And yet you stayed. Why not leave before the road closed?
Long pause, because I finally understood something important, Tony. I wasn't ready to go back to who I was, but I wasn't meant to stay who I'd become either. I needed to figure out who I could be. And somehow, I knew that answer was waiting for me in those quiet winter months ahead.
So, you made peace with the isolation?
I made peace with what I hoped it would teach me.
Marcus, you mentioned earlier that living in the woods changed how you see connection. But I'm sensing there was a moment when everything came together for you. Can you tell me about that?
Long pause there was this morning, Tony. I'd been out there maybe 8 months. I woke up and heard voices coming up the trail toward my cabin.
Voices? Other people?
My former business partner, David, and 2 other guys from the firm. They'd tracked me down somehow. I could hear them talking about dragging me back, about how I'd lost my mind.
How did that make you feel, hearing them approach?
Terrified, honestly. My first instinct was to hide, just like I'd been hiding from everything else. But then I looked around my cabin, and I saw the little gift Sarah had left me. The walking stick old Pete carved for me. Even those damn raccoons were sitting on my porch like they were ready for a fight.
It sounds like you realized you weren't alone anymore.
Exactly. For the first time in years, I had something worth protecting. Not just the solitude I thought I wanted, but this whole life I'd built. These connections that actually meant something.
What went through your mind in those moments before they reached your door?
I remembered something Pete told me once. He said the difference between running away and moving towards something is whether you're willing to stand your ground when it matters.
And were you willing to stand your ground?
Pause. I realized I had to be, not just for me, but for Sarah, who'd shown me that people could be kind without wanting something. For Pete, who'd trusted me with his stories. Even for those raccoons, who'd made my porch their home because I'd made it welcoming.
So what did you do?
I got dressed, made a pot of coffee, and waited for them on the porch. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to let them take away what I'd found.
That must have taken tremendous courage, Marcus.
It was the first brave thing I'd done in years. And you know what? My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I felt this calm I'd never experienced before.
The calm that comes from knowing exactly where you belong.
And knowing that sometimes, Tony, peace isn't about avoiding the fight. Sometimes it's about choosing what's worth fighting for.
Marcus, you mentioned that moment when you almost left the woods for good. What changed your mind?
Long pause. I was standing at the edge of my property with a packed bag, Tony. 6 months of isolation, and I'd convinced myself I was just as miserable there as I'd been in the city.
What was going through your head in that moment?
Failure. Complete and utter failure. Here I was, a grown man who couldn't handle corporate life, couldn't handle solitude. I felt like I was running toward nothing and away from everything, all at the same time.
But something stopped you from walking away.
The raccoons showed up, chuckles softly. I know how that sounds, but they'd been visiting my porch for weeks. That morning, the whole family was there. Mother, 3 kids, just watching me. And I realized they weren't judging whether I belonged there.
They simply accepted your presence.
Exactly. And then I heard footsteps, and there was Eleanor, that elderly hermit I'd told you about, emerging from the tree line like she'd been summoned.
What did Eleanor say to you?
She looked at my bag, looked at me, and said, "Running towards something this time, or still running away." It hit me like a physical blow, Tony. I'd spent months thinking I was seeking peace, but I was still just fleeing.
How did you answer her?
I couldn't. I just stood there and she said, "Peace isn't a place you find, Marcus. It's a way you learn to be." Then she asked me the question that changed everything.
Which was?
When did you last feel genuinely connected to another living being? I started to say something about my ex-wife, my old colleagues, but I stopped. The honest answer was sitting right there on my porch, washing their paws.
The raccoons.
Voice breaking slightly, those ridiculous, chatty raccoons. And Eleanor herself, even you, Tony, during our brief encounters. I'd been so focused on escaping human connection that I'd missed the connections forming right in front of me.
So, you stayed.
I stayed. Not because I'd found perfect solitude, but because I'd found something better. I'd found my way back to being present with others, even if others included a family of masked bandits and a wise woman who appeared from the forest like magic.
And that was your real moment of peace.
That was when I finally came home.
Marcus, you mentioned something shifted that final week in the woods. What happened?
Long pause, the raccoons stopped coming. 3 days straight, no sign of them. I realized I was terrified they'd abandoned me too.
That fear tells us something important, doesn't it?
Everything I thought I wanted, the silence, the isolation, it felt like death. I was sitting by that empty clearing and I understood something. Peace isn't the absence of noise, Tony. It's not running away from people.
So, what is it then?
It's choosing your connections. It's knowing the difference between toxic chaos and meaningful noise. Those raccoons taught me more about community than 20 years in corporate meetings.
And that realization changed everything.
I started calling my sister that night, then my old friend Jake. Not to go backwards, but to go forward differently. I'd learned to be alone, really alone. Now I could choose not to be.
You found peace by finding your people again.
Exactly. The woods didn't change me. They just made space for me to change myself.
So, Marcus, 6 months later, you're still out there in those woods. What's different now from that first bitter week when you arrived?
Long pause, everything, Tony. I thought I was running toward silence, but I found something much richer. The raccoons still visit my porch every evening. Old Henry stops by for coffee twice a week. Sarah checks on me during her ranger rounds.
That's quite a shift from the man who wanted to escape all human contact. What changed your mind about people?
I realized I wasn't angry at people, Tony. I was angry at the person I'd become around people. Out here, with Henry's wisdom and Sarah's genuine friendship, I remembered who I actually am underneath all that corporate armor.
And the peace you were searching for?
It's not in the absence of noise. It's in the presence of authentic connection. My cabin isn't a retreat anymore. It's become a gathering place. Chuckles funny how running away from everything led me right back to what matters most.
Sometimes the longest journey is the one that brings us home. So, Marcus, 6 months later, you're still out there in those woods. What's different now from that first bitter night in the cabin?
Everything and nothing, Tony. The trees are still the same trees, but I see them differently now.
How so?
I went out there thinking peace meant silence. No people, no noise, no complications. But that hermit, Eleanor, those raccoons, even you with your endless questions, Chuckles, they taught me something I couldn't learn in any boardroom.
Which was?
That peace isn't the absence of connection, Tony. It's the presence of the right connections. The ones that don't drain you but fill you up.
And the corporate world you left behind?
Still out there, still spinning. But I'm not angry at it anymore. It just wasn't my path to peace.
Any regrets about leaving?
Only one. That it took me 42 years to realize that running towards something feels completely different than running away from it.
Beautifully said, Marcus.